Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has run down the clock in an attempt to blackmail MPs at every turn. This government is in chaos. The country is in chaos, and the responsibility for this chaos is the government's and the government's alone. The Prime Minister pulled the meaningful vote in December because she knew it would fail. And since then, in more than 3 months, nothing has changed. Not one single word in the 600 pages of the withdrawal agreement, not one single word in the 26 pages of the political declaration has changed. Today, Mr. Speaker, the government is trying to bounce this House into voting for a damaging deal that we have twice rejected. But as ever, the Prime Minister refuses to listen. Today's vote, third time lucky, the Prime Minister hopes, is an affront to democracy and an affront to this country. Separating the withdrawal agreement from the future relationship when the Prime Minister told us the two were indivisible. This is what she said to the House on the 14th of January, and I quote, "The link between the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement means that the commitments of one cannot be banked without the commitments of the other." Today, the Prime Minister is asking us to take a punt on the withdrawal agreement and hope the best for a political declaration. It's not good enough. The two are linked. And nothing, Mr. Speaker, demonstrates that linkage more than the backstop. The reality is, the political declaration is incredibly vague, and there are, in it, I quote, "a spectrum of possible outcomes. Nothing is even close to being resolved." That makes it even more likely that the UK would fall into the backstop, which creates regulatory divergence between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, as the Honourable Member for East Antrim said. And we know, Mr. Speaker, it endures indefinitely thanks to this Parliament prizing the Attorney-General's legal advice out of a very reluctant government. Labour will not vote for a blindfold Brexit, and passing the withdrawal agreement today without the political declaration would be to do just that. The Prime Minister said at the end of November, when she signed off the deal, "We won't agree the leaving part, the withdrawal agreement, until we get what we want in the future, because these two go together." And as the Honourable Member, my friend the Honourable Member for Edinburgh South, said in his speech, it would be selling the House without knowing where we're moving to. Although, unlike me, I'm really not sure he's old enough to have watched Monty Python. Finally, yes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful indeed to the Leader of the Opposition for allowing me to intervene with him. The Leader of the Opposition should be enormously proud of the achievement of the Labour Party in the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. And therefore, I am extremely upset and very disappointed that the Labour Party today will vote against the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, which protects the Good Friday Agreement and the consent principle.
Mr. Speaker, we are very proud on this side of the House of the Good Friday Agreement and the peace that's been achieved in Northern Ireland as a result of it. And there's nobody on this side of the House in the Labour Party that wants to do anything to undermine the Good Friday Agreement and the great achievement that it was. The Shadow Solicitor General said Article 184 of the withdrawal agreement commits the government to negotiate expeditiously on the terms of the political declaration. That would be a deal based on a very wide range of potential outcomes for the country, and who would decide which direction we go in? Because now that the Prime Minister has announced her own departure, we do not know if we'll be getting the future chosen by the Honourable Member for Uxbridge, or the Honourable Member for North East Somerset, or maybe even our jobbing Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for West Dorset. The Labour Party will not play roulette with this country's future, especially when the roulette wheel is rigged by the Conservative Party. Labour respects the results of the referendum. We reiterated that in our manifesto and again in our party conference last year. But this Prime Minister's approach to Brexit has been nothing short of a shambles. The choices facing our country post-Brexit have been decided solely by what is in the interest of the Conservative Party, not what is in the interest of this country. The Prime Minister announced her red lines and went to negotiate without any consultation with this House, without any attempt to build consensus. Those red lines were opposed by the representative bodies of workers, businesses and industry, who are now, Mr. Speaker, tearing their hair out in exasperation at the incompetence of this government and the uncertainty they face. The first Brexit Secretary said he would get a deal that would deliver the exact same benefits as now. The current Brexit Secretary obviously felt that's far too good for the country, because only 2 weeks ago he went in the lobbies to back no deal and to oppose an extension. That would leave the UK crashing out in just 10 days' time with no preparations and chaos at our ports and airports, leading to a crisis in factories, shops and hospitals. And what did the government's forecast say about the Brexit Secretary's preferred no-deal option? That would make the economy not 4% worse off, but nearly 10% worse off. So it's no wonder then that, faced with a choice between the Prime Minister's bad deal and a disastrous no deal, the House, this House, has given a clear no to both repeatedly. The government suffered the largest defeat of any in parliamentary history in January. The Prime Minister said then, and I quote, "It's clear this House does not support this deal." So what's the government's response? It's tried begging, it's tried bullying, it's tried bribery, and it's still defeated by the fourth largest majority in parliamentary history. The Prime Minister told us we must leave on the 29th of March and even wrote that into primary legislation. Then she herself voted against leaving on the 29th of March. So the Prime Minister then went to Brussels to negotiate an extension and almost unbelievably even turned that into another negotiating failure. This government's Brexit negotiations have been a litany of failure, culminating in today with a Prime Minister who's been forced to announce her own departure, only tabling half the deal she has negotiated. This really is a half-baked Brexit. When she became Prime Minister 2.5 years ago, she said it was her mission to deliver Brexit. She has failed. She also stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised that her government would tackle burning injustices. Since then, she's failed every test. Homelessness is up, life expectancy is falling, infant mortality is rising, crime is rising, police numbers have fallen, and this year's NHS has had its worst ever month on history. People waiting longer in A&E for an operation and to start cancer treatment. And just yesterday, we learned that more children are in poverty and the scourge of pensioner poverty is rising again. The job of government is to make people's lives better, and this government has failed. A botched and half-baked Brexit deal like the one before us today would compound that failure. On Wednesday, the House sought to find an alternative, a new negotiating deal for the government. Labour's plan, and I believe, provides the best compromise for a deeply divided country and, in truth, a deeply divided House. It is backed in large part by major organisations in industry and business and by trade unions. It's based around the certainty of a permanent customs union, close alignment with the single market and a dynamic alignment on rights and protections. Mr. Speaker, Labour urged support for 4 of the options tabled by members of different parties on different sides of the House. We did so not because we'd be equally happy with each of those outcomes, because we recognise that we have to compromise to get this resolved. The whole House knows that the current uncertainty is damaging businesses, is reducing investment and is costing jobs now and in the future. And the stress of people in work is palpable as you travel around the country and talk to people in all parts of the country. So I hope on Monday the House retakes control, that parties and members on all sides will enter into those debates and votes in the spirit of trying to find an acceptable compromise. We need to get a better deal. The country deserves a better deal, and I'm convinced that a better deal can be negotiated. And if members decide, the chance for people to have a final say. If we cannot do that on Monday, then I ultimately, and many others would agree with me, say no alternative other than having a general election to decide who rules this country in the future. Mr. Speaker, to enable the Prime Minister to have sufficient time to answer the debate, I say this in conclusion. I urge members today to act in the best interests of their constituents and to vote down this unacceptable deal. There are many people who fear for their jobs, fear for their industry, or whether they or their friends have a future in this country, and that is causing immense stress to many people. However they voted in the referendum in 2016, they are united in their stress and concern about their future and their community's future. We need to rebuild our country and invest in our communities, too many of which have been neglected, ignored and underfunded for years. A botched and half-baked Brexit deal like the one before us today and would only deepen those problems and those divisions. Mr. Speaker, this deal, even the half of it we have before us today, is bad for our democracy, bad for our economy and bad for this country, and I urge the House not to be cajoled on this third-time lucky strategy and vote it down today.